Hi all, today we will continue studying informal fallacies. Today we will study weak inductive argument fallacies. Remember that next Wednesday, July the 29th, is the exam on the fourth chapter of the textbook. Weak inductive argument fallacies are divided in two groups. First, generalization fallacies. They occur when an argument relies on a mistaken use of the principles behind making a generalization. Second, false cause fallacies. They occur when a causal connection is assumed to exist between two events when none actually exists, or when the assumed causal connection is unlikely to exist. The first generalization fallacy that we will study today is rigid application of a generalization. It happens when a generalization or rule is inappropriately applied to a case at hand. The fallacy results from the mistaken belief that a generalization or a rule is universal, meaning it has no exceptions, when in reality it does have exceptions. For example, I can't believe the police didn't give the driver of that ambulance any citations. He was speeding, he went through a red light, and the ambulance swerved from lane to lane without using any turn signals. Of course, traffic rules have exceptions for ambulances. The second fallacy is hasty generalization. A generalization created on the basis of a few instances. This fallacy occurs, for example, in this instance. I saw a fraternity guy act rudely to a fast food employee in the food court. Probably most fraternity and sorority members are rude and arrogant. So as you can notice, the speaker creates a generalization from just one instance. The third generalization fallacy is composition. There are two forms of the fallacy. First, the mistaken transfer of an attribute of the individual parts of an object to the object as a whole, and second, the mistaken transfer of an attribute of the individual members of a class to a class itself. For example, the bricks in this building are sturdy, so the building must be sturdy. This is an example of the first form of the fallacy of composition. Now, for example, more noise is produced by a motorcycle than by a car. Therefore, more noise is produced on US roadways by motorcycles than by cars. This is an example of the second form of the composition fallacy. The fourth informal fallacy is division. There are two forms of the fallacy. First, the mistaken transfer of an attribute of an object as a whole to individual parts of the object. And second, the mistaken transfer of an attribute of a class to individual members of the class. For example, she's intelligent, so she must have smart brain cells. This is an example of the first form of the division fallacy. Another example. That fraternity celebrated its 50th birthday. A guy on my floor is a member of that fraternity, so he must have celebrated his 50th birthday. This is an example of the second form of the division fallacy. The last generalization fallacy is bias sample. It happens when an argument uses a non-representative sample as support for a statistical claim about an entire population. For example, recently, a sample of 1,000 Catholics in the United States revealed that 85% believe that abortion is morally wrong. Therefore, evidence shows that approximately 85% of all Americans believe that abortion is morally wrong. As you can notice, the argument only uses the sample of Catholics in the United States and uses that to extrapolate to all the Americans. Now let's study false cause fallacies. The first one that we will study is post hoc. The structure of this fallacy is the following. X occurred before Y, therefore X caused Y. The fallacy occurs from the mistaken assumption that just because one event occurred before another event, the first event must have caused the second event. For example, last week I bought a new car, and today I found out that I'm being laid off at work. I should not have bought that car. It brought me bad luck. As you can notice, the fact of buying a car is not related with being fired of a job. A form of the post hoc fallacy is the common cause fallacy. It occurs when one event is believed to cause a second event, when in fact both events are the result of a common cause. For example, thinking that the decrease in a barometer caused a storm, when in fact changes in atmospheric pressure is the event that caused the decrease in the barometer and the storm. The last false cause fallacy that we will study today is a slippery slope. It happens when an argument attempts to connect a series of occurrences such that the first link in a chain leads directly to a second link and so on, until a final unwanted situation is said to be the inevitable result. For example, if we stop waterboarding enemy combatants, then we will lose the ability to extract important information about terrorists and their future activities. The loss of information will lead to the terrorists plotting attacks with impunity. Since we will not be able to stop or disrupt their planning, we will suffer another tragic attack on United States soil. As you can notice, these events are not connected. The information that one obtains through torture is unreliable. Anyone says anything when is subjected to torture. Also, the use of torture and human rights violations by the US are some of the criticisms that enemies of the United States weaponize in their propaganda and recruitment discourse. That was all for today. Remember to complete exercises 2 and 8 of exercises 4C1 and exercises 8, 16, 24, 32, and 44 of exercises 4C2. Submit your answers on Brightspace by tomorrow, Wednesday, July the 22nd at midnight. Have a good day.